All right, Born of the Purple. I watched this episode like nearly 10 years ago, and this is my second time watching it. When I watched this 10 years ago, it left an impact on me. There was something I realized about my parents, and I made that connection back then. The latest episode I watched, Born to the Purple, was hard. It wasn't hard in the sense that watching it was, emotion inducing or like a train wreck kind of hard. It was hard because it left me thinking about an issue that I hadn't resolved for all of my life. Born to the Purple, as reflected in my essay, was about born into your circumstances, born into the circumstances that were given to you. Processing that information, thinking about the title, and identifying with Londo, that took a very long time. It was rather draining also. However, by the end of it, I resolved a personal issue that I never really, thought of from that perspective and resolved ever. So that was quite an experience. And I think this time, watching it this time around, actually deepened my understanding of this sentiment a bit more. It resonated a little more differently this time around. I think my understanding of it certainly has grown.
We Centauri live our lives for appearances. Position, status, title. These are the things by which we define ourselves. But when I look beneath the mask I am forced to wear, I see only emptiness. And then I think of you. And I say, to hell with appearances.
When I watched this episode 10 years ago, how I understood Born to the Purple was translated into how my parents were born into these circumstances. That, they were born in South Korea. My dad's significantly older than my mom, so he was born in the late 30s and my mom was born in 1950. And that's during the time of like a lot of turmoil and even the Korean War. For the longest time, I would have to say that my parents and I butt heads quite often because of our cultural differences, and what they understood and how they perceived their environment was really different from how I perceived my environment. They grew up at a time of like extreme poverty, barely any food, no money, no opportunities for education, although my father was able to do some college education because his father was a businessman. But they held on to these ideas that were very conventional, rigid, strict, and it's not something that I hold on to. So my mom is very focused on, I guess, the more conventional aspects of livelihood, like being able to generate enough income or feeling as if like woman had this position of being the housewife and being subservient to her husband. And those were not things that I strongly believed in. Although she also believed in a higher level of education. But going back though, when I first watched this episode, what really struck me was how my parents were born under these circumstances, and it wasn't something that was in their control. And these circumstances changed how they perceived the world and how it shaped their personalities. And I realized at the time that I couldn't really blame them for being so different from me, and that I had to be more accepting because they couldn't be. They couldn't be as open-minded. Although, with time and living in America, they've grown into accepting or acclimating more into the culture here. But that's with a lot of resistance that both my brother and I expressed to them during the course of time. But I thought like how sad it was that my parents were born under these circumstances and they had no control over it. And yet I blamed them for a pretty significant majority of time for being ignorant and closed-minded and even very offensive. But I thought at the same time how sad and tragic that is, that they only knew like a sliver of what the world was based on what they lived through. So this time around, there was something that struck me. In a conversation between Adira and Londo, Adira says to Londo, well, as Londo says, like I'm an old, Republican, and, her calling him ambassador didn't really, I guess, mean much. But she said, her response to him was, but these are my better days. Certainly, I would have to say that my parents have set the course for my brother and my better days for our life now. Like they did, like whatever they went through, I can only imagine. But because they were able to set the course for like what our future could possibly be and what it is today, they certainly set the stage for that, for my better days. So I really can't, like, watching that and listening to Adira's line, I think filled me with a lot of gratitude, despite all the challenges that I had growing up. They really pushed for better education, and they really pushed for us to become better people in their own ways. But yeah, I am actually living my better days. And so like, how much anger and resentment can I like then hold on to with my parents? Because it's a huge topic of mine, a huge issue for me, like how I feel towards my parents for being a certain way and being so different. I'm really like struggling for words. Like it's not as sophisticated,
You're talking how you normally speak about it. I think you're skirting around some things.
Yeah, like I can't fill in the gaps in my head right now, like with the language.
Yeah.
Like it's part of like not having been engaged in like intellectual conversations with people. Like I barely even talk to you now, right? So, and like the only person I ever talk to intellectually about anything has been with you, but our conversations have been limited. So, and now I speak more Korean, and now and I work on a dementia unit. So my conversations on the dementia unit are the same every day. And it's like the same conversation with one person 20 times a day. I mean, like, so I'm struggling for words here, and not because I can't really think about what I want to say, but the level of sophistication is really diminished. The huge issue really is, like me having a lot of anger towards my parents because I really thought that they were really crappy parents. But that's my sophisticated language now. And they were really crappy parents because they weren't really there for us. Their priorities were different. Their priorities were on survival. And growing up, what I needed for priorities was love and affection and warmth and connection and attachment, right? A healthy attachment. And we had none of that. My brother had none of that. Like not in the way that you would imagine more mindful parents to have these days. We didn't have any of that. We had domestic violence, we had alcoholism, we had fighting, we had fish being thrown across our fish store to the customers. I mean, that was my spectacle, like Londo talks about like appearances, right? And I mean, what appearance did we have? We were a tourist attraction people pass by this, our fish market, and it's like, hey, it's that crazy Korean couple over there throwing fish again, like we were the tourist attraction, and we were just short of like crazy Korean keychains as souvenirs. I mean, I think that would sell really well now, wouldn't it? With a fish being like thrown across the sky.
Well, like, 10 years ago, Born to the Purple for you was like, you took the title specifically from, not necessarily what the title actually means, but from what Londo said about himself.
Mm-hmm.
The line about him being, that the Centauri are all about appearances. They're all about, playing this game where they're backstabbing or trying to one-up each other. That's why they keep these purple files, right? They keep information on the different houses, and
right.
so that they can have basically a modicum of power
right.
over each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of really resonated with you, this idea that, your parents also grew up focused on appearances, focused on gaining some modicum of power over their circumstances, trying to survive, trying to have better for you and your brother, or for a different life. So it's like you came into an understanding of what that meant for them. And that sort of really resonated with you. It was like they were born under these circumstances. The things that are important to them are the things that were important at that time for them to survive, to have some semblance of power. And yet, they never let go of that for most of your life.
No, they never let go of that, After my father lost his parents when he was really young, I think he turned into a pack rat. So, he's turned into a hoarder. And that's a function of having grown up in an era where you never knew when you were going to get your next meal, or you never knew if something was going to have value to you, like this garbage that he found in the street. Until this day, he still does that, even though, they get benefits from the state. But even till this day, it's just not something that he ever let go, even though anything he brings home from the streets, right, that he picks up and collects garbage from, has absolutely no value, no meaning, and no use, no purpose in the house. And yet he still does it.
What about your mom's values of what she believed were important values for
Oh, boy.
And to a certain extent still thinks, the value of a woman in her time, very different from a value of a woman now. Well, not so much, depending on who you ask.
What my mom believed the value of a woman was to be a subservient housewife, to be able to cook well and clean well, and manage the household, affairs well, right? Where it's like, Koreans have a saying, it's called 살림 잘해. That means like you could sort of manage the finances, do the groceries, and juggle all the housework and be a good housewife, and like there's no waste. You're resourceful. It's a combination of all that, right? And my mom believed that was so valuable, and that defined what a good woman was. So in my much earlier years, when I was dating, I feel like really ashamed to say it, right? It's so embarrassing, like looking back and like reflecting on this now. Like when I was dating, like I would talk to, like, guys would ask me, oh, so what are you good at, right? Well, I'm good at cooking. I'm good at cleaning. I'm good at, managing my home affairs and, taking care of the house. Dude, I'm essentially like telling them I'm a good maid. I mean, like, what guy wouldn't want to just have a free maid, and who also has a full-time job? And at the time, going for a higher level of education. a part of, like, just saying that out loud makes me feel like disgusted. Like, it's not even like said in a place of like, oh, like I really enjoy cooking because cooking is my passion, but it's, I'm good at cooking because that's what I'm supposed to do as a Korean woman. Ew. There's such a different, like, it resonates so differently. Yeah. Yeah, the title Born to the Purple was interesting for me. I mean, for the Centauri, for Londo specifically, it was about like this, like, basically, you know, the dirty files on everyone else in the house so then they could take each other down whenever they had it. But for me, Born to the Purple meant that you're born into a set of circumstances that you cannot change. And that's just the way it is.
So 10 years ago, you understood that about your parents.
10 years ago, I understood that about my parents. And today, Adira's line resonates with me. That, you know, whatever Londo has done thus far has created better days for her now. And whatever my parents have done after they came to America in order to survive, like toiling like their blood, sweat, and tears, my brother and I have better lives. And I can't deny that. Despite how awful they were as parents, I can't deny the fact that, you know, I've achieved as far as I have. And my brother has as well. I can't deny that. And you know, for that, I feel grateful. Even though they were crappy parents, I got as far as I wanted. And you know, you could also say like, well, you know, this was my determination. Yeah, but it was a determination that was shaped by the kind of life I saw through them and how much I didn't want it. And that alone is still like influence, right?
So you mean you succeeded in spite of
Yes.
them?
Mm-hmm.
You're not giving them credit for your success.
To a certain degree, I can give them credit because they still really emphasize education, right? And they were supportive of us going through school. And you know, both my brother and I, we qualified for low income financial aid because we were living in poverty at the time. You know, as you can imagine, with, you know, even though my parents had this fish market, if you're throwing fish at customers, you weren't doing very well. So yeah, we were still living in poverty even with this business because the business was not successful. So, you know, because they set the stage for what they believed the values were that were important, which was education, and because they wanted us to have a better future, and they emphasized the idea of what a better future looked like, that much I give them credit for. Londo, at the very end, when he was saying goodbye to Adira, and he does all these things for him, right? Her. There was so much grace in his interaction with her and how he handled the whole situation. My belief is any average person would see this circumstance and like how the woman betrayed him and almost ruined his life, his career, and the whole Centauri race, would be so angry at her, would be so besides themselves that they would seek revenge, in my opinion, and what I understand of like a typical person, you know, the behavior of some typical people. But the way he handled it at the end was so graceful. He says, you know, she apologizes to him for what she's done. And he says to her, I've been in love many times and I have been hurt many times. I'll survive.
I never wanted to hurt you.
Adira, I am an old man. I have been in love many times and I have been hurt many times. I'll survive.
It was just so accepting. And that line I just thought was so beautiful? It tells you, you know, just the kind of person he is in that, like in that line. I don't know, it really resonated with me.
There comes a point, and this might be something that you're only just beginning to understand where you are in your life. There comes a point where those types of things are not as important as you would think that they are. So, yes, she almost ruined his career, the way he says that.
Career.
And, you know, she was going to bring the whole Centauri Republic down with these files or whatever. But, like, in the end,
Right.
Londo has been through so much. Like, to hold anger over something like that, as opposed to appreciating the time that he had or the love that he felt or the positivity. Like, there comes a point in your life where you realize that you have less good things coming for you instead of holding on to all of the anger and feelings of hurt and betrayal that you get from people. And I think that's something that Londo makes very clear about how he's old and he's been in love plenty of times and he's been hurt plenty of times, and you know, he cares more about the time that he had with her.
That sentiment right there is something that I feel like I'm coming into more and more now. You know, after going through all my struggles, I would have to say that my growth and my maturity was stalled for quite some time. But it's more and more in more recent times that, like, the little things don't matter as much as they once did. I mean, I used to obsess over like cleaning weekly my house and making sure like everything was in place, and instead, for example, like now what I value is just the free time I have and to enjoy the things that I enjoy, rather than doing something that I was sort of automated to do.
Groomed.
Yes, the word is groomed to do, and groomed to find value in. So yeah, like Londo's sentiment is certainly something that I, like the way he was seeing the world and his level of maturity was something that I'm finding much more that I'm coming into, and much more appealing too. And like, you know, when he gave the brooch to Adira, I initially thought, you know, oh my God, you know, this has been in your family line for how many generations? This belonged to a strong, courageous woman and a matriarch, and it's been in the family for so long, and he kept it for so long. And for something that you keep for so long, in my opinion, you don't just easily give away, because it's like it just took too much effort, and it just took too much of it. It had so much meaning, right? But But the thing is, though, he's valuing the moment, and he's not letting go of that moment. He's not missing that moment to show an opportunity to someone else to continue to have better days.
It's beautiful.
It's from the earliest days of the Republic. It originally belonged to a matriarch of my family, a woman of wisdom and strength, grace, and great beauty. I've had it for many years.
I can't take it.
Oh, but you must. I insist. And you know how stubborn I am. Come on. Go ahead. Oh, pretty.
And he's giving her something that meant something for this woman who also is strong and beautiful and will go forth, holding on to that as well. Like, what a beautiful way to transition a tangible gift with such deep meaning.
Then take this and wear it proudly as a free woman.
So like I thought, then the thought that I had was, what a beautiful moment. And that these moments are really important. I mean, after all, isn't our life a collection of moments? Like the positive ones and negative ones, and with those moments we create a story. So yeah, like I just was thinking, there are too many moments that I could have had. I thought, like there are too many moments that I could have had, and I didn't take them because maybe I wasn't mature enough, and I was too shallow or superficial, or thought that things couldn't be given up so easily. But I'm finding more in recent times that moments are really important because that's all you really have.
Forgiveness was never your strong point.
Nope. Forgiveness was never my strong point, no. And the
that's
reason...
what Londo ultimately does is he easily forgives.
He easily forgives Adira.
That's not the amount of value that he gets out of the relationship. It has nothing to do with the betrayal so much. But forgiveness and you are not really friends, I would say.
Forgiveness and I were not very good friends. Forgiveness meant letting go of anger. I preferred to be angry.
That is true.
I preferred to be angry because holding on to anger meant I could continue to... I mean, there's a variety of reasons, right? There's a whole number of excuses. It means I could stay in a state of misery, which I think appealed to me for a long time, right? It justifies how I felt. Anger just, like holding on to anger towards someone else justifies I can be angry. And in that, like, I don't know, there's a level of satisfaction. I think that's like on the superficial level, but...
I'm going to take a leap and say something a little risky.
Hmm?
But in all honesty, for a very long time, it seemed to me that anger for you was also a weird sense of value that you had. That you could hold on to something for so long. Like your anger gave you value. It gave you an excuse to be angry, but it also gave you an excuse to be strong and mad and unforgiving.
Right. So the way I coped with like a lot of the trauma in my life was holding on to anger and then sublimating that anger into pushing me forward. That's what I did. That's what propelled me forward. However, I reached a point where the anger no longer served me anymore because I already reached the point I really needed to reach by holding on to this anger and sublimating it as my coping style. And that's where it became problematic, because when your coping mechanisms no longer work anymore, you have problems.
Or you don't need them.
But
you said you got as far as you wanted to go.
Or it's just not appropriate anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need it because it's not appropriate and it doesn't serve you. It no longer serves you. That's when I ran into some problems, interpersonal problems, and that's when you and I really fought. I mean, I think we had up to World War 20, like really, okay? I mean, there's been a lot of exiling going on.
Yes.
And then there was a turning point, right? And then there was a turning point when I realized it just isn't working. And slowly there was acceptance. And slowly there was forgiveness. And slowly there was this accepting that, like, I'm not perfect. Because a lot of that was driven with how I felt like I need to be a perfectionist as well in it too.
Isn't that part of your grooming from your mother? That sense of being this perfect version of a woman or wife or whatever, your appearance, how clean your home is, how nice your clothes are.
Yeah, on the exterior.
Mm-hmm.
On the exterior, the perfectionism came from shame inherently. Because I grew up in this environment where love wasn't a centerpiece of what family meant, shame is what drove the perfectionism. Like feeling that I was the problem, and I'm the source of shame, which is why I didn't get love. That drove the perfectionism, I would say. When I came to understand that much, slowly as well, because everything was like this slow progression of understanding, nothing really quite happened quickly for me, as with anything, like when you're making huge personality changes or value changes. Unless it really hits you significantly, then you could change really quickly. But shame was really interesting because I thought that I wasn't worthy. I thought that I didn't deserve love. I thought that this is the reason why my family was so dysfunctional. And I'm also the first child too. So I was doing a lot of the taking care of my family and picking up where my mom couldn't because she was too busy wrangling in my dad and still trying to have this business operating, because if that completely failed, we'd be really in deep waters, right? So yeah, shame was what drove my perfectionism, and so I felt like I needed to be perfect in order to counteract the feeling I was having of myself, how I perceived myself, how I thought that I had no value, even though I was doing so much more than what my peers were doing at the time. Like I learned how to cook when my peers were throwing birthday parties by their families and, by their parents, and had, their friends come over and they're serving them lunches and their parents are taking them on day trips. That wasn't my scenario. The person I actually really connect with is Ivanova. Ivanova is a character I really, really connect with. When you first see Ivanova, you see this extremely hard, cold, stern exterior, and she doesn't really show facial expressions, and she's all business. That was me for a majority of my life. I would have to say all throughout high school and especially all throughout college, that was exactly me. No one knew about my vulnerabilities. No one knew about my life story. No one knew about my upbringing. That was just me. So, and when people approached me, I couldn't joke with them. I saw things way too seriously. There was no warmth or connection with people, especially during that time of my life. I probably would have to say also in my grad school days too. It really carried through. But she has these moments that are where she puts herself out there, and she's very true to herself and honest. And I have to say that those moments that she shows are me now. All that stern, hard exterior that she had was a huge chunk of my life for a very long time. But as I studied psychology and as I came within myself much more, and as I learned how to connect with people at a warmer level, at a more genuine level, and at a more human level, I've allowed myself to be much more vulnerable, honest, and true to who I am in my life story. You know, like thinking about it, even when I did this B5 video like 10 years ago and I started that, even then I didn't want to give too much of myself. Even then I didn't want to share too much of my life and all the things that I've gone through. I would have to say like what now is easier. Now like I can openly share things. Before I held on to these rigid beliefs about like how, you know, one, people don't need to know my life story. It's not interesting. It's too much. It's too vulnerable. It's too personal. But like I said, as we were talking about Londo, like as I'm coming into this point, into myself and coming to a point where superficial things don't really matter anymore. The direction of my career doesn't really dictate things. I mean, for the longest time, I thought, you know, as a clinical psychologist, oh, I shouldn't be sharing my life story to the public. I shouldn't talk about myself. I mean, true psychoanalysts, they never gave any indication as to like any hint or anything that would affect free association and like the transferential process for the client, right? So having lived this life with an alcoholic parent and then to go into a field where there seemed to have been so many restrictions, and what I understood at the time while I was going through school held me back. But now it's like, you know, there are bigger things in this world. There are much more important things in this world. My personal life is just a part of anyone else's life. We all go through struggles. We all have challenges. We also have like stories of triumph. But that's all part of being human. Ivanova. You see these moments of vulnerability in her. And I value that so much. The first time in this episode, you see her talking to her father.
Susan, I know I haven't been the best of fathers to you. But when your mother passed on and your brother was killed in the war, I was too wrapped up in my own grief to pay attention to your needs. And when you joined Earth Force against my wishes...
You don't have to say this, Father.
Yes, I must. There's no more time. I want you to know how proud I am of you, Susan. I always have been. But a father should give his daughter love as well as respect. And in that, I failed you. I'm sorry. I'm ashamed. Forgive me.
And he says, I failed you. I recently had this conversation with someone about my dad. And And he's Korean, right? And his boss is a very successful Korean businessman. In this conversation, I asked him, you know, like, I wonder what it would be like to meet to spend time with like Korean men who are so not like my father. What would it take for you to be a successful Korean businessman? It would take a lot of hard work, meticulousness, conscientiousness, determination, drive, strength, and passion. You know, for a very long time, and for the longest time, and even now, I cannot fathom what that would look like. I cannot even imagine a Korean man being all these things that I also am, right? Like having the conscientiousness, the meticulousness, all of that. I just can't even imagine that. I believed that all Korean fathers were exactly like my father. That they can't cook, they can't manage the house, they can't do anything because, of course, the women are the ones who are supposed to 살림 잘해, right? To take care of the household really effectively. So I can't imagine that. So I said to him, I wonder what it would be like just to have a conversation, even to be able to hold a conversation with someone like that. And I thought, like, wow, this is another world. These Korean men are of a different, are from a different planet. There's no way. There's no way they could be that. There's no way. Because my father was the epitome of the opposite of all of those qualities. So as Ivanova was hearing these things from her father, I imagined what it would be like for my father to actually say those things to me. And I just can't imagine that. And in that, compounded with just the kind of life we lived, was this enormous sadness that surfaced for me. Can we just pause here for a bit? I did not expect that. But I'm also at a very sensitive period of my life right now. Like I'm on the verge of like really being fried and burned out.
Sure.
Like I'm not okay.
Yeah, everything seems very raw for you. Very much on the boiling point.
Yeah. I'm doing my best. Like this is good. I'm enjoying this project a lot, okay? But between my health and just the work, like I'm reaching this. I may already be there.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, okay, I gotta stop crying because I can't talk like this.